From the Atheists of Florida headquarters office in Tampa, this is the Atheist Forum, a production of Atheists of Florida Incorporated. Join us now for Atheist Issues Today, as we begin 30 minutes of unscripted conversation about atheism, religion, state-church separation, and the associated issue of the day. And now here are the hosts of the Atheist Forum, Jim Peterson and Ed Golly.
This is Jim Peterson here, and I'm pleased to welcome everyone. We're going to be talking about all kinds of atheist issues, some things you wouldn't believe, and other things you shouldn't believe. So we're going to start off today. As you can see, we've got all kinds of wonderful source material here, and as you know, the world is rapidly changing, and we have a tremendous amount of things to talk about. And Ed is going to start us off with a lead story about the Messiah.
Oh, all right. Shows that how we are still dealing with hostility toward atheism here in this country, and how religion is still infiltrated into our judiciary, which we thought was resolved when the Constitution was signed, right? When we agreed in the very first amendment that Congress would make no law respecting an establishment of religion, and that has been identified by the courts throughout the history of our country to mean that our legal system will not take a stand with respect to religious issues.
Actually, I think our founding fathers thought that for about 15 minutes until some religious person came by.
Yeah,
but
tried to change it. And they're not supposed to be imposing religion on us in our laws or in our culture. But here we have an incident that happened back in August, early part of the month, where a judge actually required a parent to rename their child. They wanted to name the child Messiah, and the judge said you can't do it. The article actually is about the ACLU protesting this and standing up for the civil liberties of the parent to be able to name their child whatever in the world they want. They point out that there are an awful lot of children in Mexico and other places in the world named Jesus. Right?
Not to mention Muhammad.
Exactly.
And other places.
And they, of course, are not all required to change their name. But in this case, the thinking of the judge was there's only one possible Messiah, and so the judge ordered the baby's first name to be changed from Messiah to Martin. And the mother sought an order to establish paternity. Her request asked the judge to determine the child's last name. Well, when the judge heard the Messiah's first name, she decided it should be changed too, saying the child could face problems with the name Messiah. So it's a title, according to the judge, and it's a title that has only been earned by one person, and that one person is, well, who do you think, right? She told this to the TV station right in her office. It may not be a traditional English name, but it's becoming more popular. Number 4 now among the fastest rising baby names in 2012, just ahead of King, but behind Major at number 1. So asked about that name, Jesus, the judge said it was not relevant to the case. Curious, isn't it?
Yeah, I can hardly wait for Christmas time so I can go out and hear a performance of Handel's Martin.
But, of course, it's still worse in other parts of the world than it is here with respect to freedom of religion. And I think, Jim, we really tend to take our civil liberties for granted in this country. Those of us who were born here and spent our whole lives here may have felt some social pressures to be to have a reluctance to say that we're atheists, or bring that out either through any kind of public announcement that we're atheists, because we fear reprisals, maybe from business, maybe from family. And so it's just easier to keep it to ourselves. And always, has been, that's sort of been the underlying cultural the imposition on those of us who are members of the community of reason. You shouldn't even say you're an atheist because it equates you to being a communist or an un-American, whatever. One of the reasons that Atheists of Florida was formed was to give atheists a vehicle to be able to meet other atheists and deal with those issues.
And it's really a shame in a way, because I like to think of atheism as being fully expressive of that which truly is American. That is, we Americans came up with the idea of the separation of church and state. And this is the atheist idea, that a government is a secular institution. It does not need the government to sanctify and authorize a religious perspective, idea, set of beliefs, or creed of any kind. So and as we'll see as we go through some of these things here, we'll begin to realize that the role of religion increasingly is a repressive one. And some of the other things that we are very much concerned about is what has happened within the Middle East, in the Islamic world. And you may have seen an article in the paper recently detailing how people in the Arabic Muslim countries particularly are severely repressed. Ed, you have some details
yeah,
on
a 23-year-old Arab named Rafat Awad, who had actually preached Islam at his university and encouraged his fellow students to read the Quran and pray. But throughout the whole ordeal, the young Palestinian-born pharmacist had gnawing doubts. So, which is common with people who join our organization. They tell us that's their life story. They were inculcated with religion through their childhood and began asking questions about the dogma of religion, and ultimately, when they didn't get good answers from whomever had been brainwashing them, for lack of a more pleasant term, they ultimately rejected religion, became atheists, and then felt very much isolated in the world. Well, that's still the case in the Arab world, because people who speak out against religion are subject to arrest and imprisonment. There was a case, for example, of a 40-year-old Egyptian engineer who told the Associated Press he had long been an atheist but kept it a deep secret. Before the revolution, he said, I was living a life in total solitude. I don't know anybody who believed like me, which we say is, of course, lacked belief, because atheists don't believe, they reject beliefs. But last year, a Christian who identified himself as an atheist, or does now, was arrested after neighbors complained he'd posted an anti-Islam film on his Facebook page. He denied it, but he was still sentenced to 3 years in prison for blasphemy and contempt of religion. When he got out on bail, he disappeared and had to move to France. So, of course...
Well, he got off light then, because as is well known, the Quran urges believers in Islam to exercise the death penalty against what they call apostates. Actually, apostate is a word that applies to anybody who rejects or even doubts traditional religious beliefs and ideas. And this has been a problem throughout human history. In fact, you look at the Jewish and Christian faiths, and most others too, and you'll see that there is great strictures against believers rejecting their beliefs. And usually that stricture involves the death penalty, which can often be strongly discouraging to those who would like to express their lack of belief and their doubts and so forth. We, again, being an American means that you can express those ideas, those doubts, and those beliefs, even though in our society it's generally hard because there are quite a large number of believers. But nevertheless, we have a legal system that will not act, or is not supposed to act at least, in coordination with churches to try and repress non-believers.
That's right. But although the tide is changing, Jim, a poll came out last year that took a worldwide poll of where people stand with respect to religion, and the numbers, I think, are changing relatively quickly. So the time is now for us to speak out and encourage others to question their religion seriously, and not feel compelled through conditioning since birth to accept religious dogma, but rather understand that increasingly larger percentages throughout the world of our species are beginning to reject religion and understand that this is just ancient mythology that has no place in the world we live in. You mentioned about the death penalty in the Muslim religions, and yet it's the same thing in Christianity. It says very straightforward, whoever doesn't accept this one particular God shall surely be put to death. Rejecting the Christian God is a capital crime according to the Christian religion.
And the Inquisition.
Yeah, that's right. I'm always intrigued when I hear people proclaim that all of our democracy and our freedom and our liberty comes to us from the Christian religion. I think, well, then if that's the case, why wasn't there a natural evolution in Western Europe through the Dark Ages to change from kingdoms to democracies? Never happened. It didn't happen until our founding fathers came over here, looked at the history of religious domination of cultures and said, you know what, we're going to try something new here.
In fact, that's the reason why so many of our ancestors came over here to this country, was to escape religious repression. Yeah. That's the very reason for it.
Says now, a year ago, this poll was taken a year ago, 59% of the world said they think of themselves as religious, 23% think of themselves as non-religious or not religious, and 13% now think of themselves as convinced atheists. 10 largest atheist populations, percent atheist. What country has the largest percentage of atheists in the world? That would be your basic China at 47%. They're almost halfway there. And with some proclaiming that they may be the next empire, predominant or prominent empire in the world, with half of them being atheist. It could even have a further influence, I think, on other countries' populations.
It should also be observed, of course, that China has traditionally been an atheist country because of its involvement with Buddhism. Buddhism being a religion, but not one which necessarily employs a deity. In fact, there's a lot of out-of-work deities now, and we should take up a collection.
But shamefully, the United States, it says here, ranked, didn't even make it in the top 10 nations. It ranked 34th as a religious country. Actually, we should say that's pretty good, but they didn't rank in the top 10, of the atheist countries. The bottom four were giving figures of 10% atheists. And this is not just not religious, but this is people who come right out and say they are atheist. Austria, Iceland, Australia, and Ireland, and the United States didn't make it into that. They rank 34th as religious. So we have a way to go. Fortunately, we didn't make it in the top 10 largest religious populations, though. So we can still talk about atheism without fear of reprisal or arrest, I guess.
Yeah, so far so good, and as has been discussed in other venues, it is largely to the extent that science and technology brings people together, allows us to communicate with each other, and acts to correct the mythology, because during ancient times, when there was no knowledge about how the world worked, no knowledge about physics or chemistry or anthropology or anything else, people had to rely on the religious myths passed down from one generation to another to actually explain the world as they encountered it. Now, however, thanks to the rise of science, we have a large body of information that allows us to know just where and who we are and what this universe is about and how it works. So we no longer need to reference a deity or to reference traditional religious ideas to give us an understanding of all of these important matters.
But then why, Jim, do you think religion survives as prominently as it does, even in a country like ours, where there's really no excuse for not understanding, the mechanics of the cosmos
Sure.
and what our place is in it? I've come up with 2 reasons. I'd like to hear yours.
Well, I think ignorance. Ignorance brought on by a lack of education and brought on by the fact that so many of our parents themselves not well educated in the sciences. We have in this country a tradition of anti-intellectualism, a tradition which makes it difficult to engage in scientific and intellectual enterprises of various kinds because there's such a prejudice against it. So we have a lot to do, I think, to correct that situation.
Now, my take on the whole issue is that the 2 reasons I came up with for the survival of religion are that even though we really should know better, we really understand that the first humans weren't made out of a pile of mud, that the world really is not only a few thousand years old and it never was flooded and so on. We know these stories are wrong. But people still cling to religion for 2 reasons. One is it offers this bogus, false promise that we can somehow live for all eternity. Our consciousness, that is, can survive for all eternity. So the desperation to cling to this idea is what compels people to continue to embrace religion, that we can survive our deaths. And the other reason, I think, is it offers simplistic solutions to increasingly complex issues that we deal with in society, such as same-sex marriage or that one being the prominent one, abortion.
In our
things
time,
that are,
yes.
that where it used to be, if somebody was gay, they just throw them in jail. It was a mental disease, that was the end of it. Now we're beginning to realize it's not that. It's not unusual for something on the order of 10% of any population to actually be homosexual, and so why should they be deprived their civil liberties?
In so many of our social beliefs and practices and ideas, such as racism and sexism and all the other isms that serve to isolate people and to repress them, those are being questioned. We live in a different time now, in a different. Things are changing.
But
It's
when
not
they challenge
hopeless at all.
tradition, right, then the response is, well, I don't really need to think about how this is going to change traditional marriage or traditional dealings with people. It's just wrong. It says in the Bible. That's all you need to know. Everything's black and white, right or wrong, good or evil. Everybody else in the world can be labeled the bad guys because God's on our side. Says so right on our money, right? And so that gives us the simplistic answers to issues, and I think that's why the religion survives. We want to take just a minute to talk about
we need to break with tradition
atheists.
and
break the subject. Talk a little about Atheists of Florida.
let's do that.
This is a nonprofit membership organization that you can join from anywhere in the world. We have been in existence since 1992, so we're now old enough to drink. But we do publish newsletters periodically that tell you some of the things that we're up to, and we will mail them to members, paid members, if they want a printed copy to take with them anywhere, or they can read it on our website at floridaatheist.org.
You say they can take it with them anywhere.
Any place they want.
Take it into the bathroom.
Free classified advertising for members, but the main idea, of course, is to support atheist organizations and the kind of activities they involve in, which can be challenges to state-church separation issues, camaraderie for atheists. Why did you join, Jim?
What?
Wow.
I joined. I'm a life member, in fact.
There you go.
I think I would recommend that to anyone. And let me emphasize, we do need your support. These things don't just happen because a bunch of folks sat down and decided they want to be on TV. Well, yes, they did. But anyway, even so, the idea of atheism and the contribution that you can make to the growth of your society is sufficiently important that you should feel impelled to part with just a little $20 bill just send it right on into the
Florida
the
Atheists.
address. Go to floridaatheist.org, and there you will find the necessary mechanism to accomplish your heart's desire.
But the thing is, the larger we are in number, the bigger voice that we have, and the more support that we have, the more we can nudge those numbers from 13 to 15 to eventually 20% of our population that
Or
feels
more.
comfortable letting everybody know they're atheists. I think there will come a time when, big Hollywood starlets will be coming out and telling the world they're atheists, and it will be well received, better than we would even imagine right now by the public, that people will no longer be chastised in their professions for being atheists, because it's such a natural position to take these days.
There are already some starlets who are
Probably are, yes.
and stars too, I might add.
What else do we have, Jim?
What else do we have? Oh, we have all kinds of stuff here. Let's see what goes on. Religion rules under review. The school board may allow students to distribute religious materials on campus. Isn't that nice? Not really. A lot has been happening lately with the notion that if the government allows religions to do something, and this has been a particular dilemma that I've had, and in other words, if religions can distribute the Bibles or other religious tracts in publicly owned facilities, then perhaps atheists should have the same privilege. The problem with that is that what the government is doing in making those allowances is patently illegal. And because we're supposed to have separation of church and state, we're supposed to be fully a secular country. And I think it's important for us to emphasize that. That's instead of making a swap. But there are those who disagree with me on this point. Hard to believe, isn't it? But nevertheless true. And so it's a little controversy that we review from time to time. And
But one of the first people that needs to learn that is our own state senator, Marco Rubio, who
yes.
just doesn't quite get it, in my opinion. There was an item a couple of weeks ago in August 2013 about Rubio and his appraisal of our essentially of our Constitution and where religion stands with respect to government. To him, part of America's genius is that we do not feel threatened by each other's faith. And yet, when I think about the issues that divide us in this country, before we ended up in this war in the Middle East and incurred this crushing debt to pay for it, most of the issues that divide our country are founded in religious thinking and in religious conditioning. If we could get rid of religion, we could get rid of most of the problems that not only we in this country face, but nations all over the world. I think it would behoove us sometimes to stop and think about that. How many issues and how many arguments we have over topics that are really based only in religious conviction instead of common sense and civil liberty. Of course we're threatened by each other's faith. That's what keeps us divided in this country.
Well, it's of course one thing to have a lively dialogue about the nature of our world, about religion itself. In fact, there are many of us who are exponents of the idea that religion should be taught in the public schools, but not taught as religion, instead studied in the same way that we study politics and we study other matters in a completely objective way. And if we did that, we would understand that there are certain common aspects of religion that play a central role in how human beings have come into existence, how our societies were formed, and why we end up doing the things that we do. And if we understood this and appreciated it from an objective standpoint, which is the only way that a public education should possibly treat the whole question of religion, then I think we would be well served. What do you think, Ed? Should we have discussion of religion in public schools?
I have no problem with with classes or courses that teach the foundations of different religions and how they came into being, what their tenets are. I think that what would really be surprising to most people who took objective courses in world religions, it would be how similar they all are. They all have their, sort of a parallel type of or style of story of beginning and how things started out. But what it would do is, I think, more than thinking in terms of this being something that would condition people to accept other religions, is to understand how these religions have affected the history of Western civilization, how we got where we are, how they led to our civil liberties, the way that religion imposed itself on people, and the fact that for so many years citizens didn't have freedom of thought, freedom of conscience or expression, but they were the property of the kings and the priests that ruled them. They were literally the subjects of those people. Fortunately, now royal families exist more or less just for almost entertainment value, right? Yes. And just as a connection to the past, to the history of that country, but for no purposes of ruling the country whatsoever. We've done away with that in most parts of Western Europe. Of course, poorer nations don't suffer that same advantage. But
actually, they're not that entertaining either. A lot of us think they're kind of boring. But another great commonality.
But not the clothing manufacturers. They love it.
They do indeed. But another common aspect of nearly all of the religions is that each one of them thinks that it alone is the only true religion.
Of course.
And all the others are.
And they're quite intolerant of dissent. Right? That
Well, that goes on.
You are not supposed to go out and look into other religions or investigate other gods. You will subscribe to the God that typically that
Your
governs
parents.
the culture that, in which you were born, or you're supposed to be put to death. So, of course, religion doesn't encourage investigation of other religions, and I have no problem with public schools doing exactly that. But certainly not like Mr. Rubio says, America has always been a place where religion brings people together. As we, beat our breast and proclaim to the world we're this great melting pot, we better be ready to absorb people of other religions and understand that they have different cultural backgrounds, they have different traditions, they have different ways of looking at the world. Are we going to tolerate that or be intolerant of it? Better if government is just completely neutral with respect to that, as it's supposed to be. Let everybody do what they want, and don't chastise those of us who reject those primitive superstitions either.
The wicked witch of the East felt the melting pot. I think it wasn't good though for her.
No.
Well, I think we are beginning to come to an end of our little sojourn into the happy or unhappy land of religious coverage in the media. But we'll be back again for more. So we hope
don't
that
forget
you
we
will
have
be too.
we have chapter meetings and some live audiences, and we're going to find ways to
Actually, most of our audiences are alive, aren't they? Yeah.
Sure.
They're great folks.
Allow people to call in and talk on our programs with us, or set up a chat room. So we hope you'll continue to follow the exploits of the Atheists of Florida on our website, through our newsletter, and join and be part of the few and the proud, and what we say with no reservation, the intellectual elite. I'm Ed Golly, along with Jim Peterson, reminding you, if the story seems just a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because somebody wrote it down.
Make them prove it. Thank you.
Well, now we've played it back and see how.
Thank you for listening to the Atheist Forum. The Atheist Forum comes to you from the Atheists of Florida, a nonprofit membership organization that brings atheists together to become aware of state-church separation issues and to stand up for our constitutionally guaranteed freedom from religion. To learn more about Atheists of Florida, write Post Office Box 130753, Tampa, Florida 33681, or email us at atheistforum@aol.com. And be with us next week for more talk and talk back about freedom from religion here on the Atheist Forum.